Today's guest is Dr. Pim Van Lommel. He is an internationally renowned cardiologist with over 30 years of research on near-death experiences. He is the author of the book Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of Near-Death Experience, and he has published a now famous study of NDEs in the reputable medical journal, The Lancet. Dr. Van Lommel, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today.
You're welcome.
In your book, Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of Near-Death Experience, you talk about how there is a materialistic explanation for everything you accepted up until a certain time when you changed. Can you tell us what made you change your mind about this?
Well, on medical school, university, we learned that consciousness is a product of brain function, and that's what we accept. And it's still in the medical community, and neuroscientists still believe this never proven assumption. And it was also my opinion. But when I have read a book, now the first time I ever heard about a near-death experience was in '69, just starting my specialization in cardiology. That was one of the first coronary care units in the Netherlands. And CPR, resuscitation, cardiopulmonary resuscitation was just new because we just started the electrical defibrillation and the external chest compression. So we always forget that people before 1967 all died of cardiac arrest. So CPR was due. And in 1969, we had a patient who we resuscitated with several times of defibrillation, and he regained consciousness. And we, as a resuscitation team, were very happy. I was the doctor in charge. But the patient seemed to be very, very disappointed. And he told me about music, a tunnel, wonderful landscapes, etc. And I've never done anything with this until I read a book about near-death experience by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, who had an extensive near-death experience as medical student in 1943. He died of a double pneumonia, and there were no antibiotics available for him, so he died, and he was dead for about 9 minutes. So his body was covered with a sheet. And the nurse was so upset that this medical student had died that he persuaded the doctor to give him an injection right into the heart with adrenaline, which was quite uncommon in that time. And he regained consciousness after 9 minutes. And he wrote a book about his deep near-death experience. And the moment I have read this book, I started to interview my patients who had survived a cardiac arrest in 1986. And within 2 years, out of 50 patients who had survived a cardiac arrest, 12 told me about their near-death experience. And that was the moment that my scientific curiosity started to grow, because I had always read that it was impossible to experience consciousness, let alone enhance consciousness, with cognition, with emotion, with memories. At the moment that you have cardiac arrest, because we know that people are deep unconscious. So it was the reason we started a prospective study in 1988. In a total of 344 patients who survived a cardiac arrest. And we found that 18% of those patients had a near-death experience, so an enhanced consciousness. And we tried to find out if we could have an explanation for the cause and content of the NDE. So we talked to all those patients, we interviewed them, and we found out, to our surprise, that there was no medical explanation at all. That why only 80% of those patients reported a near-death experience. So all patients, 344 patients, had been unconscious due to cardiac arrest. And there was no difference in the group of 82% of the patients who did not report an NDE, and the 18% who did report an NDE in the duration of cardiac arrest, 2 minutes or 8 minutes. The duration of unconsciousness, 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, didn't matter at all. So the severity of anoxia, lack of oxygen in the brain, did not matter at all. And then the given medication, when people have complicated CPR with artificial respiration, they have high doses of medication as well. Didn't matter at all. Religion, if they were Christian or atheist, didn't matter at all. Fear of death or psychological explanation didn't matter at all. So we found, to our surprise, that there was no scientific explanation at all why only 80% of these people reported NDE. And so that was the moment that I should ask myself, how is it possible that people with cardiac arrest can have this enhanced consciousness? So the second part of our study was also a longitudinal study where we interviewed all patients who survived cardiac arrest with an NDE, and we had a matched control group of patients who had also survived cardiac arrest but without an NDE to see if they have a different transformation, because we know that people after an NDE have a transformation. And we found out that only patients with an NDE had a classical transformation, which means no fear of death anymore. They are convinced there is an afterlife. They have a new insight what is important in life, that is unconditional love and empathy. First towards yourself. Accept yourself, accept your own negative aspects. Everybody has it. And it is hard enough. And then accept and have empathy, compassion towards others and towards nature, because they feel connected with everybody, with everything. That's why an NDE is also called the experience of unity, of oneness. And the third aspect of transformation is the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They feel and know what other people think and feel. And this very a big problem for them, because they don't want to know about other people. And we found out so that the transformation is the, let's say, the objective proof that the people have an NDE, because NDE is still a subjective experience. But because with all the patients we talk to, and also have a lot of other patients not in our study, that they have the enhanced consciousness with cognition, with the possibility of perception out and above the lifeless body. Memories from early childhood, sometimes in flash forward, seeing future events as well, meeting deceased relatives, seeing a being of light and feeling unconditional love and feeling total acceptance. That's not to be explained by brain function, because there have been studies done what happens in the brain during cardiac arrest. And we know that when you have cardiac arrest, there have been studies done in, let's say, where you have an implantation of an ICD, an internal defibrillator. You have to do the threshold testing. In the past we did it. Then you have to induce cardiac arrest. And we did it with EEG measurement. That is the registration of the electrical activity of the brain, EEG. We found that those patients lose consciousness within seconds. The blood flow to the brain, through the carotid artery, is zero within seconds. The body reflexes are gone, which is a function of the cortex of the brain. The brainstem reflexes are gone. So the gag reflex, the corneal reflex, and widened pupils don't react to light, and the clinical findings of those patients. The breathing center close to the brainstem stops functioning. The people have apnea, they don't breathe anymore. And when you have the registration of the EEG, you always see within 10 to 20 seconds there's a flatline EEG. So the objective findings and also the clinical findings show us that there is no brain activity at all within, let's say, after 10 to 20 seconds. So this, and we know that no patient on a coronary cardiac will be resuscitated within 20 seconds. It always takes 1 or 2 minutes at best, but usually much more. So we know that all those patients in our study and also other prospective studies, that they must have had a flatline EEG as well. And because of this enhanced consciousness without a functioning brain, we have to, again, discuss the never-proven hypothesis that consciousness is a problem of brain function.
Can you give us some examples from your book of stories that have impressed you the most?
One of the examples is a man of 44 years old who was found in a meadow. And he was brought into hospital. It took about 30 minutes before he was in hospital. He was already cold and blue, no respiration, no circulation. His pupils were wide and didn't react to light, no breathing. So the first thing the nurse was doing is he wanted to intubate the patient. And he found out that he has still dentures in his mouth. So he took out the dentures and put it somewhere on the crash car. And he gave him artificial respiration. And the CPR took about 1.5 hours, which is quite long, but he was a young man, so they tried on. And after 1.5 hours, he had blood pressure, he had circulation, but he was still deeply unconscious and needed artificial respiration. So he was transferred to the intensive care unit to continue this artificial respiration. And after 1 week, he regained consciousness and was transferred back to the cardiac ward. And the moment he was there and the nurse came in, he said, "Oh, you know where my dentures are." Mm. And he told the nurse, "You were there when I came in the hospital. You took my dentures out of my mouth. You took it somewhere in a sliding underneath a car with all those bottles on it." And he could describe in detail the appearances of all the nurses and doctors who were busy with the CPR. He could describe from a position out and above his body the resuscitation room where he was, where the CPR took place, where he was brought in coma and was transferred out of this room in coma. But he could describe everything into detail. So the nurse was very impressed, and I was impressed as well. So it proves that there is a critical perception from a position out and above the body, and he also had another aspects of a near-death experience when the brain doesn't function at all. He was in really bad shape when he came in hospital.
Since people are able to remember their experiences when their brain is basically not functioning, to me that means that memory should also exist outside of the brain. Do you have an opinion on that?
My opinion is that the brain and body, but especially the brain, has a, let's say, a filter function or a transceiver function. It transmits information from the body and senses towards consciousness, and it receives information from consciousness into the body, which is called our waking consciousness. So when we are awake, we have waking consciousness, which is just a part of this enhanced or non-local consciousness. Non-local consciousness means that there is no time and no space during this consciousness. When people have a life review, they can talk for a week about what happens, but the cardiac arrest took just 1 or 2 minutes. So there's no time and no space. They have see things from the past and see things from the future, and everything at the same moment. So and also they have memories from early childhood, but usually you don't remember when you're awake. So that you have access to many more memories than when you're awake. So your brain has a filter function as well. You don't remember everything, but you remember such a lot. Also, not only what happened in the past, but what you see is you see your life back, and not only everything what you have done, but also everything what you have said, and everything what you have thought is kept forever, and also the influence of others. So when you took from your 5-year-old sister some plaything, you feel how shared she was. So you're connected with the consciousness of others as well in the past. So you're totally connected with everything and everybody, beyond time, beyond space. So everything is stored outside our body and outside our brain. The brain has just a function of this limited function. And it's not in our brain, but we need our brain. So the brain has not a producing function, but the brain has a facilitating function. It makes it possible to experience consciousness and to experience memories, but not the whole memories and not your whole consciousness.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Is that clear?
Yes, it's very clear. And I kind of say, it's almost like the brain is kind of like a radio. The radio waves are out there. You just, you have to tune it in to get it. It's kind of like your consciousness is out there and the brain tunes it in to express it.
I compare it sometimes with iCloud. So there's 1 billion websites or 1 billion YouTube films, and you need a functioning instrument like an iPhone or a laptop or a computer to receive some aspects, some films or websites from this iCloud. But what you see in your computer is not produced by your computer. It receives the information from the cloud, and the cloud is accessible all over the world. But the difference with the consciousness is the speed of light. in electromagnetic information exchange or the iCloud. But consciousness is instantaneously, beyond time, beyond space. But people understand it. Also, your television set. Yeah. When your television set doesn't function, there's still a program. They need another television set to see the program again. So also the television, also the radio, is just a receiving instrument.
After interviewing many NDE experiencers, I've come to find that some of them will admit that there are parts of their NDE that they will never share with anybody, or they will only share them with other NDE experiencers. Have you ever come by that?
Well, they're extremely reluctant to share their NDE with others, and that's because they're so overwhelmed by this experience that they try to share it with others, like they share it with the doctor, they share it with the nurse, they share it with the partner, with the family members, and nobody believes them. They just said, oh, just a hallucination here, extra medication, you will forget it. So people don't believe them. And that's a very hard problem for them. So it sometimes takes 10 or 20 years before they are able to share their experience with others. And this period is, so, and he is a spiritual trauma. There's a lot of depression, a lot of loneliness, a lot of homesickness, because they have had this experience, what was more real than real for them, that nobody believes them. But at last, when they have found someone who can listen without any comment, without any prejudice, they can start to accept the experience. And later they can try to integrate a new insight into their life. That will sometimes take 30, 40 years. So that's why they are so reluctant. And especially the enhanced intuition, the sensitivity that they know sometimes what is going to happen with other people. They know that when they see somebody, he will die in 3 months, and he will die in 3 months. It's frightening for them, and they don't want to share it with others. So you have to ask for it. They don't hardly ever talk about it spontaneously.
I think what I was trying to say is, even these people who do share their experience, there are certain aspects of their experience that they won't tell anybody. For example, I had a guy recently who said that when he popped out of his body, it was almost like a sensual experience.
Like a what kind of?
Kind of almost like a sensual.
What kind of experience?
It was almost like a sensual or experience. The act of actually popping out of his body.
So that's an interpretation of the feeling, and it's not about the content of the experience, but about how they experienced it. I've talked to hundreds of thousands of people, and I've had emails from all over the world. Tens of thousands of people emailed me, and they usually are very open to me because they know that I will accept what they tell, and they know I'm open. So depending on who they talk to, they will be very open as well.
That makes sense. It seems like there are usually two outcomes. They either leave their body into a place of blackness that's calm and peaceful, or they will travel somewhere like through a tunnel to a place cloud-like that's overwhelming with love. My point is, at least when you pop out of your body and you're only in the place that's black and calm and peaceful, do you think that's a result of when you're free from your body, you're no longer reacting to the chemicals of your body, whether they're produced by yourself or, caffeine or alcohol?
No, when you're out of your body, there are no physical instruments anymore left. So what happens when you're going out of your body in an NDE? The first thing they realize, oh, is this death? Am I dead now? And then first thing following is usually an out-of-body experience, that they see their own resuscitation, CPR, or their own surgery from a position out and above the body. And they see a body there, like they say, that's my body, but that's not me. I'm here. I'm totally fine. I'm feeling good. I'm happy. And then they can come into a dark space, which sometimes can be frightening as well. About 15% of the people then have a frightening aspect of this dark space. And then they see a small light that they're attracted to, and they describe it as a tunnel. And then they come into the otherworldly dimension with beautiful colors, beautiful landscapes, etc., as we told before. And then probably they come consciously back into the body at the end of the NDE. It's awful to come back in the body. Their consciousness is much too wide to fit in their body again, and the body is again with the problems of the disease as well. If you had a coma, broken legs, minor traffic accident, myocardial infarction, etc. So you're back in your diseased body as well, and your consciousness is much too large to fit in this body.
Why do you think people say that their NDE is more real than their life here on Earth?
They experience it because when they are back in the body and back in this world, they say the world up here is more like an illusion. And what happens there, what I experienced there, is more real than real. It's felt like home with a capital. This is home. This is where I come from. This is where I belong. This is where I come from. So that was far more real than the illusionary aspects of this physical world.
What do you think about critics who say that when people are experiencing an NDE, they're really experiencing a reaction with DMT produced by their own brain?
Well, first of all, there's hardly any DMT in the brain. There is some DMT in the brain, in the epiphyse. I don't know exactly the English word for it, but it has a half time of about 1 second, and it is a small amount of DMT. So when your brain stops functioning, it disappears within 1 or 2 seconds, and the NDE can take minutes. And we know that from the out-of-body experience, etc. And we also know that DMT, like ayahuasca, sometimes give experiences a little bit like NDE, but not exactly the same. Usually can give hallucinations as well, and terrific aspects as well. But there are examples of a positive NDE-like experience with transformation with DMT, also with LSD, and also with psilocybin as well. So there are some drugs that can sometimes, in some circumstances, give an experience like an NDE, but they don't have all the experiences, all the elements of the experience as people with a real NDE.
Yeah, I personally always thought it wasn't due to DMT because the people who do use DMT and smoke it will say that even though they have this experience, they generally cannot remember most of it. Oh. And when they come down from it, they'll have a pen and paper sometimes, and they'll try to write it down.
So the main problem for me is that I just only compare a DMT-like experience or LSD-like experience, then there is transformation. Then they remember what happened to them, and there is new insight in what is about life and death. And that is rarely happens.
How have you changed over the years doing all this research, personally?
Yeah. Well, I was educated as let's say, a more agnostic family. We had a Bible, but I was not committed to a church or so. And after I've met many people with an NDE, I started to read the Bible, but also to read the Vedas, the Upanishads, to read the Tibetan Book of the Death, the Kabbalah, Gnostic Christianity, etc. So, and then you see that this kind of experience had been there in all times, and all religions and all cultures as well. So Plato has written about it, the soldier of Earth. Plato has also written that the body is just a temporary carrier of the soul who is eternal. So it's exactly the same insight has been through all times in religions. So I changed my insight as well. When I was young, I believed that consciousness is just about the brain function, and that was the end of who we are. But now I am really convinced that there's a continuity of consciousness after the death of the body. So we have a body, and we are consciousness. That's a totally different approach as before. So I can call them now religious in the term as the really terminology from Latin, religere, it is reconnect. religion is to reconnect. So reconnect with everything that there is in the other dimension.
This is a little bit different, but it's still kind of similar to me. A lot of people in the UFO world are starting to believe that everything is interdimensional. Spaceships travel here interdimensionally. The beings are interdimensional. You speak about it, the NDEs being, I think it's either consciousness being non-local, and when someone leaves the body, they may be going to another dimension. Am I correct by that, saying that?
Yes, it's the non-local realm, where everything is connected, where everything for past and future is available. Mm-hmm. And in the past it was called the Kasha field, or noosphere, it was also called. So it's another dimension where everything is, and it's where consciousness is. But for me, it has nothing to do with UFOs, etc.
I guess what I was trying to get at is, you've talked to thousands of people, and I'm sure people have told you they've either met Jesus, or they've met Buddha, or a being of light, or Muhammad. I would assume possibly that some people have even said, they've maybe met angels, or even beings that are non-human in form. Would you agree with that?
They have met beings of light, and how you call them is usually they say it's a being of light or an angel. And also when they see a Jesus-like figure, they say a being of light, or perhaps Jesus. So they don't call them extraterrestrial beings. Mm-hmm. They don't call them like that. I've never heard them.
Okay. I believe it was a story, an anecdote from you that I heard a long time ago, and if it's so, it'd be great if you could tell us again, that you were at a conference speaking about NDEs, and another cardiologist got up and spoke and was against it. And someone from the audience, got up and said, I did have one, and I didn't want to tell you about it.
I'll tell you the story. So there was a conference about 300 attendees, and there were stories about NDE, people who told about NDE, and at the end of the conference, the cardiologist stood up and said, I'm a cardiologist for more than 25 years. I've never heard such absurd stories and don't believe one word of it. Then another man in the audience stood up and said, I'm one of your patients. I have had an NDE. You would be the last one I would ever tell. Mm-hmm. Because they feel and know that these kind of doctors are not open to listen at all. So that's why these kind of doctors never will hear a story by people who have an NDE. They know, because of the enhanced intuitive sensitivity, that these doctors will not listen at all.
Why do you feel some doctors won't listen?
I think they're frightened. There are a lot of prejudice. It doesn't fit in what they have learned in medical school. It should be impossible to have such kind of experiences of enhanced consciousness when the body doesn't function at all, when the brain doesn't function at all, when under general anesthesia, when people are in coma. It should be impossible that people can have this enhanced consciousness with the possibility of perception out and above the body, with cognition, with emotion, with memories. It should be impossible. So they don't believe it because they heard that it would be impossible. And the second thing, they're frightened. Frightened, also neuroscientists are frightened because they try to study consciousness when looking through the brain. And they got all the research money for this kind of studies. But when they are wrong, when they have been wrong the whole life, looking for consciousness in the brain that is not to be found there, they're frightened. So I know quite a lot of professors and doctors who say privately to me, you could be right, but officially they say this is total nonsense until they retire. And then they say openly, you are right. But I couldn't tell you because I should lose my job, could lose my research money, etc. So they're frightened.
Is it true that they don't even know exactly how the mechanism of anesthesia works? I mean, they understand that the drug crosses the blood-brain barrier, but they don't know the mechanism of what's happening with consciousness and why people lose consciousness.
Well, what we know with general anesthesia, that the communication between the different neural centers and the exchange of information between the neural centers stops. And we need this kind of communication between neural centers and exchange of information to be conscious. So the brain is still functioning. When you have an EEG during general anesthesia, you see activity, but it is not the activity you need to have waking consciousness. So the communication has stopped between the neuronal centers. So the whole neural activity isn't functioning well.
Would you say that there are two types of consciousness, a waking and a sleeping consciousness?
Well, the waking consciousness is what you experience when you're awake. And that it's just a part of the non-local consciousness. When you are sleeping, you don't experience any consciousness at all. So I always ask people, is your consciousness when you're asleep? There is consciousness, but you don't experience it in your body. When you're dreaming, that's something else. So there is another activity in the brain as well. And you can have dreaming experience, which is also usually can be non-local. So without time and space. And sometimes you have recognition dreams, prognostic dreams, that you dream from some event in the future, and years later you say, oh, that's what was my dream about. A funeral, a disaster, a marriage, etc. So you can have access during dreams to the non-local realm as well. But usually not.
I guess what I was trying to discover for myself is the difference between sleeping consciousness and general anesthesia, because with general anesthesia, you're not feeling pain, or I guess even touch sensation either. But I think under sleeping, you still would if somebody, struck your body.
No. So there's a difference between general anesthesia and sleep. But still, you don't have your waking consciousness, but you very easily wake up by touch, by noise, etc. So there's a huge difference between general anesthesia and sleep.
Are you the one that first wrote about Pam Reynolds and her experience?
Oh, no, I'm not the first one. That was another cardiologist in the past. But I wrote about it in my book as well, because it's a very important patient. She had an aneurysm of a brain vessel, which is a kind of balloon in the brain vessel, which can break down and then you die. You get loss of blood in your brain and hemorrhage in your brain. So she had complaints, and they found out that she had a very difficult location of brain vessels, that is an aneurysm. And at that time, she needed an operation, Dr. Spetzler in Houston. And to do this operation, they cooled down the body. And they bring the general anesthesia. And then they lift the body like this, the head up. So all the blood vanishes out of the brain. So the brain has no blood at all. Deep under general anesthesia, and then they heard the instrument of the surgeon who needed to open her skull. And she also saw surgeons in her groin looking for arteries and veins, and she didn't understand why, but they needed it for the artificial circulation machine, the heart-lung machine that you use in cardiac surgery as well. Then they had a very deep NDE, also meeting with these relatives, angels, light beings, etc. And she was sent back by her uncle who had died. And she didn't want to go back in her body. And he forced her to come back in the body, which was a very cold experience because the body was still very cold. And then she could remember everything later. She had a very deep NDE. And what is special, that during her operation, her EEG was flatlined. And she had also things in her ears to see if the brainstem did function, but the brainstem didn't function at all. So there was objective proof that there was no electrical activity of the brainstem and no electrical activity of the cortex, and still they have a very deep, extensive NDE with the possibility of perception out of above the body. So it is one of the only patients that is always measured during the NDE. Because normally when there is a cardiac arrest, we don't have an EEG registration. We try to resuscitate the patients. And it takes minutes to put on all the EEG dots. So we don't have an EEG in cardiac arrest patients.
It appears that some people have an NDE without actually dying or going through trauma.
Yes.
How is that possible?
For scientific research to find an explanation for the cause and content of an NDE, we look for patients with cardiac arrest, because we know in those patients the brain doesn't function at all. They still have enhanced consciousness, again with the possibility of perception, cognition, etc. But also in other circumstances, like let's say a fear of death situation, near traffic accident, of mountaineering accident, when you think this is the end, a truck is coming to your car, you think, well, this is the end, you can have the same kind of experience as well. Or when you have an extensive existential crisis, a deep depression, or isolation, lost in the desert, near drowning, shipwrecks, astronauts, Pitcher and Glenn had it around the planet Earth. You also can have it in meditation. You can also have it without any optional reason. You can also have the same kind of experiences in the end of life terminal patients, which is called end of life experience for death visions. So there are many circumstances where these experiences can happen. But for the discussion, if these kind of experiences happen in the brain or not, then we know in cardiac arrest patients that these experiences happen when the brain doesn't function at all. What is interesting also to know that when you measure brain activity, let's say fMRI or PET scan, in patients who use DMT or LSD or Psycho B, you see parts of the brain stop functioning. They have less activity in some parts of the brain. So when the brain's function is less, there's more chance to have an enhanced consciousness. So that's again, the facilitating function of the brain stops. So you're just right into this enhanced consciousness. The connection between the body and consciousness is just disappeared.
I'm sure you've probably heard people's stories of reincarnation over the years.
Yes.
Do you believe in that?
That's not about my belief. I think that what Ian Stevenson has studied, thousands of patients who under the age of 4 or 5 spontaneously tell about a previous life, and more than 95% of the elements seem to be true. And also Jim Tucker is doing now the research in reincarnation in young patients. That must be true, but Ian Stevenson has said it's without reasonable doubt, but it's not proven by science, because you cannot prove subjective experience at all. But I think the reincarnation, also sometimes people with very deep near-death experience can come in contact with a previous life as well. And you can also have these kind of experiences in deep hypnosis. The life between life or the regression hypnosis, then you can come into other lives before this life. So I think it's a reality. So, and it's because consciousness does not disappear. There's a continuity of consciousness, and sometimes these aspects of this higher consciousness makes a choice to come back in another body. And that's what we call reincarnation.
There is a significant amount of people that have NDEs, but there's a higher percentage of people that don't. Do you think NDEs are happened by accident?
No. It's depending of the age. Let's say we did our study in cardiac arrest patients with the mean age was 62 years old. And we found that patients under the age of 60 had more NDEs than the older part of the study. We know in retrospective studies where usually by traffic accidents and near drowning, etc., the mean age is between 35 and 45, the percentage of NDE is 30 to 40%. And there's one prospective study done in small children under the age of 7. And there was found that 70% of those patients had an NDE. So the connection between the body and consciousness is still much more open at younger age. And when you're older, it's more strict. But we also found in our study that people who had an NDE at younger age in the past, they have more chance to have an NDE as an adult in cardiac arrest, because the connection between consciousness and brain was still, again, less strict. And also in women who have been sexually abused in the past, and then they leave the body because of sexual abuse, they have more often an NDE as an adult. So it's about everybody will get out of his body when they die. But when you're older, you will need perhaps more time. And a cardiac arrest takes 2 or 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And perhaps they need 50 minutes or half an hour or an hour. We know by the studies of after-death communication, which about 125 million people in Europe and more 100 million people in the US have had this kind of experience. Then you have contact with the consciousness of a deceased relative. That means the consciousness is still there. So there's a continuity of consciousness. But not everybody leaves his body within the first 2 or 3 minutes of cardiac arrest. That's just a speculation, but it could be an explanation.
Yeah, I like that. I never really sat and thought about what are the effects of age or the coincidences of age with NDEs.
And also the other question is, why did, in our study, 82% did not report an NDE? Or did you just, is it that they didn't remember it? And that's why we did the longitudinal study, that we found that the transformation, the classical transformation, is only with patients with an NDE. And we know with children under the age of 5, when they have had an NDE, they usually don't remember the NDE, but they all have the transformation. They all have the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. So the transformation is there even if they don't remember the NDE at younger age. And because we didn't find the transformation and our group of not reporting an NDE, I think they didn't have yet the NDE. They didn't yet leave the body because they were back in the body again because they needed more time. But still, again, it is a speculation. You can hardly prove it.
Have you seen many people having an NDE under general anesthesia during surgery, but it wasn't a surgery that was, like they had a cardiac arrest or they had a surgical outcome where they died and had to be brought back?
Yeah, there have been patients with surgery who had cardiac arrest of a sort of loss of blood or complicated childbirth, also loss of blood can happen in NDE. But also the younger people who had a tonsillectomy with ether, and they had an overdose, and then they had also an NDE at the age of 6 or 5, or age of 9. And so they're not really a cardiac arrest. They have an overdose of ether, and then they went out of the body as well. So it can happen in anesthesia as well. General anesthesia in this time doesn't cause an NDE, but complications in surgery can cause the NDE.
All right. So are you working on any new projects? Perhaps another book?
No. I think my book is quite complete, and I've written some articles, not too many, but all in really important journals like the Lancet or Journal of Consciousness Studies, all review articles. And I lecture all over the world and give interviews all over the world. And I think that's important because the younger generation is looking more to YouTube films than reading a book. So I think the internet, online interviews are important to share my insight with others as well.
Can you confidently say with 100% certainty that consciousness exists beyond death of the physical body?
Well, it's the same. There's no scientific proof. It is beyond reasonable doubt. Because, first of all, people can meet the consciousness of deceased relatives in NDE. And the after-death communication, which happens in so many people in the first days, weeks, or months after the death of a loved one, they feel contact or communication with the consciousness of the deceased relatives. Sometimes see them, feel them, hear them, smell them, have communication with them, which proves that consciousness is still there. So for me, it's beyond reasonable doubt there's a continuity of consciousness. But because it's a subjective experience, you cannot objectify it. The problem with consciousness, and the problem with subjective experiences, we cannot measure it, we cannot objectify it, we cannot duplicate it, we cannot falsify it. So that's the problem with subjective experience. So we have to expand science into the post-materialist approach, where you include subjective experiences as well.
All right. Especially with the times in COVID right now, near-death experiences have become very popular, especially with the TV show on Netflix.
I know. Is it true?
Yeah. So before we go here, is there one last message of hope that you can give people?
I think the main thing is that what we can learn from people who have an NDE, there's the change of life inside. First of all, where you know that death is not the end. There's a continuity of consciousness. That's all about love and empathy towards yourself, to accept yourself, also in the negative aspects. That you're connected with other people, with nature, with planet Earth. That everything you do to others and also to nature will come back to you in positive and negative aspects. If you don't treat the planet well, you will feel it. We see the future, and we have to really realize that the future of planet Earth is important for our children and grandchildren. If we go on like this, it will be the end of human beings. So, and when you know that's not the importance of material world, about power, about money, about a young body, about big car, etc. But when it is important to know the internal aspect, the spiritual aspects of life, then we will change our own consciousness, and then by changing our consciousness, we can change the world as well. We can change the future of our planet as well.
I just had one last question here. Are you aware of the study where they started, I believe, putting marks on the floor of surgical rooms or painting numbers, so in case people, I'll say you are. Is that study still going on? And do you know of any conclusions from that?
Yes, you talk about the AWARE study by Samparia. But we did it in our study as well, in one or two resuscitation rooms. And never anybody saw this hidden sign. And also Penny Sartori in the British study did it. And now Samparia is doing it. The problem is, first of all, people are resuscitated in the street, in the ambulance, in the ward, in the intensive care unit, the coronary care unit, the pulmonary care unit, whatever. So you cannot, surgery, operation rooms, you cannot put hidden signs all over the hospital and in the street. That's one of it. Second is, when you're out of your body and you see your own resuscitation, you see the body lying there, you're feeling fine. You don't start to look around if there could be some hidden sign, especially for you. That's what we call the unintentional blindness. There have been many studies done. I write also about it in my book. So that unintentional blindness is when you look, or your iPhone when you drive, there are many more accidents. You cannot give your attention to these things. So you need attention and intention to perceive things. And when you have not the intention to look around in out-of-body experience, you will not see the hidden sign. So for me, it's the explanation, the unintentional blindness is the explanation that people will not see the hidden sign. But which is much more important is to interview patients when they had an out-of-body experience and to ask the doctors and the nurses, the family members, if what they report really happened. That is the corroboration of theoretical perceptions of out-of-body experience. That has been a chapter written by Janice Holden in the Handbook of Near-Death Experience, and then recently a book done with about 150 corroborated theoretical perceptions, which is called The Soul Does Not Die, publication by Irons, which proved that people were really out of the body and what they perceived really happened. I never say they saw it, but they perceived it, because you don't see it with your eyes. You have a 30-60 degrees view, you have to see details and overview at the same moment. You see it out and above your lifeless body. So it's perceiving and not seeing.
All right, Dr. Van Lommel, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today. I really appreciate you. I wish you the best.
You're welcome.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.